Welcome to Liberty and Justice. I'm your host, Matt Whitaker. I'm excited to be joined by Kevin Hassett, a man that really needs no introduction, but former head of the President's National Economic Council. So, Kevin, glad you could be with us.
It's great to be here with you, Matt.
Yeah, and I am, I've been bringing on people to talk about the border. I've talked to people about kind of every aspect of this Biden administration's situation, but except the economy. And so you, as a real expert in this area, um, are my guest. And I really, I think coming out of this week, we saw the inflation, monthly inflation for, I guess that would have been what, March at 8.5%. What does that mean? First of all, I think a lot of people see that number, and does that mean just in March prices went up 8.5%, or is that a trailing 12
Yeah,
months? Let's talk a little bit about that.
yeah. Well, what happens is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you're always going to start a really scintillating podcast if we mention the Bureau of Labor Statistics right at the
Yeah,
top, right? I mean, absolutely.
BLS for short.
Yeah, BLS. That they report based on a really good survey what's happened to prices every month. And so what they do is, and they'll basically keep the same people in the survey for a little bit, but they'll sort of say, what did you buy this month,
Mhm.
and what did you pay, and bring your receipts. They're really trying to make the data good, and then what they'll do is that for like say food, then if it's the Hassett family, that we're buying milk, we're buying bananas, we're buying hamburger, things like that, and then what we could do is we could say, well, we bought hamburger and we paid $5 a pound last month, and then this month we paid $5.50 a pound, and then the price, that means the price of hamburger went up by 50 cents, for my family. And what they'll do is they'll aggregate. They actually have like a very large sample of real Americans who are actually going to stores and buying stuff and keeping their receipts. And then they're adjusting for the fact that maybe last month you bought a pound and a half of hamburger, this month you bought a pound. So they get it all lined up just right, and then they take like the average of the change in the price and call that inflation if it's going up, and deflation if it's going down. And now, of course, you buy lots and lots of stuff every month. Probably a little fewer hair products than me, but right. But the point is, our bundles are different, right?
No shampoo, no hair
No
product.
shit. What they'll do is that if you wanted to have like Kevin's inflation, then what you would do is you would look at like the bundle of stuff that I buy, and allocate the price change. So say 10% of what I spend my money on every month is hamburger, say. Then 10% of the Kevin index would be the price of hamburger,
Mhm.
right? And then I spend money on other stuff, and the weights that they get when you're calculating the Kevin inflation is basically just the percent of your consumption that is that thing, and then the price change of that thing, and you take the weighted average of all those, and that gives you like the Kevin inflation rate. And then if you want to know the aggregate inflation rate, you're sort of averaging the inflation rates for everybody in the sample. And so in the end, you're basically weighing more of the things that are consumed more. And so if there's something that you really, really don't consume very much, like a book by AOC, the price that price change is probably not going to affect the Matt Whitaker price index. Now, um, so in the inflation data, then there's basically, it's broken up into something they call core,
Yeah.
and something that they call food and energy. And the reason they do this is that food and energy prices are really volatile, and they could go up and down from month to month in crazy ways. But core things, which are going to be like shelter and haircuts and stuff like that, the core things tend to be a little more stable. And so if you really wonder like where's inflation going, then looking at core can be a better thing to look at than to look at the overall top line. Now, in the latest data, you mentioned the 8.5% or so. What that is, and just think about it as like Matt's inflation number, because there really is a sort of different one for each person in the abstract, right? Then what it means is that
Vegas, for example, or
the,
something like that.
the stuff that you bought a year ago is 8.5% more expensive today. That's what it means. So that's simple. The stuff that you bought a year ago is 8.5% more expensive today. Now, the reason why that number, I think, is being pointed to by the mainstream media as like the measure of inflation that we should look at, is it really understates how bad inflation is right now. And since inflation's a political thing, and since the media are totally dishonorably in the tank for Democrats, you and I have seen it over and over when we served in the Trump White House. These guys are scoundrels. Don't get me started on Bob Costa. It's just anyway. So the fact is that they will look at the year-over-year number, but remember that inflation basically began to accelerate when Biden took office, and so the numbers like through last August or September didn't really start to be that bad, and then they got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so if you look at the year-over-year number, then what you're doing is you're sort of averaging inflation from some really bad months at the end with some really good months at the beginning. And that's why it's only 8.5%. And I know that everybody who's listening is probably thinking, geez, it's worse than 8.5%. What's that? Well, that's because inflation is way above 8.5% right now. And so for the latest month, if you're to put it at an annual rate, if all the months for the next 12 months are the same as March, then inflation's running at about 15%, not 8.5. And so if we repeat the March report 11 months in a row, exactly like it is in March, then when we look at what Matt's buying, then it's 15% more expensive a year from now than it is today. And so that's like really very much a definition of out of control inflation.
Yeah, and most Americans are not making 15% more, and so this has completely eroded their buying power. And really suddenly, because to your point, this high inflation has only happened in the last several months. They've felt a real pinch in what they can buy with their resources, because maybe let's say that their salary went up 4 or 5%. They all of a sudden they have 11% less buying power, right? That's what the net effect for most Americans is.
Right, and the way that ends up like being like a macroeconomic phenomenon, is this, that there are two ways to calculate the output of the economy, and there's gross domestic product, which is sort of adding up like the number of things that are made, and gross domestic income, which is just looking at how much income is made by all the people in society, businesses, individuals, and so on. And because wages right now are growing at a rate like probably about 5.5% annual rate, if we were to get the sort of 14% inflation that would happen if March repeats itself for the rest of the year, then you're going to see the decline in the real wage, or the real purchasing power of your salary, that would be perhaps the largest on record. And so I expect wages to accelerate to try to keep up with inflation, but they're not going to. And remember that as the wages go up to try to catch up with inflation, the wage bill for a typical firm is 70% of their cost. And so if they give everybody a 10% raise, then they've got to if 10% raise, they got to raise their price by about 7% just to cover the 10% raise. And so that's where the wage price spiral starts. And it's really just an ungodly mess that happened for a number of reasons. People say, well, why did it happen? The first thing is that don't forget that that when Biden came in, that there were all the Democrats were talking about this modern monetary theory, which is basically that we can spend as much as we want and print money, and it's not going to cause inflation. And they were literally, pitching that cockamamie theory. The problem with that is, it's fine to have a theory that's incorrect. I do it all the time. But but then I falsify to move on to another one, right?
Right.
But the problem is that if you actually think that the government believes that stuff, then you yourself sort of say, well, okay, they're going to do a really irresponsible policy. Inflation's going to go out of control. And so your expectations of inflation start to become untethered to the 2% that you've always seen. And you begin to act accordingly. You sort of like will say, hey, I've got a 5-year contract, but instead of going up 2% a year, I want to go up 3% a year, or because I'm worried that Biden's going to make inflation get out of control. So that's why, like, the minute that Biden took office, inflation started to go up because of that. The second thing is, and they're calling it the Putin price hike. It's really quite comical that they would, because the price has been going up long before Putin, the evil man that he is, invaded Ukraine. And our hearts, of course, we have to pause and go out to the poor people of Ukraine, and the suffering and the death is just horrible. But it's not Putin's price hike.
The only thing that really is imported from Russia is oil and gas, and so that's, like you said, that's excluded from core because of the volatility. And so we're not getting our eggs and our milk and our hamburger and all those things from Russia, and really Russia has no impact in those markets.
Right. Well, yeah, there might be a little, but the fact though is the energy prices started going up the minute Biden took office, and I wrote a National Review article about this recently, but. One of Biden's first moves when he came into the White House was that he established a commission to estimate what they called the social cost of carbon, which is like the harm to the earth from burning fossil fuels. It's a quantifiable number. And their social cost of carbon basically gave an estimate of, like, if you had put a ton more carbon into the atmosphere, what does that cost society in actual dollars? Now, in economic theory, then if there's something that's a pollution, like a really obvious one would be sulfur dioxide coming out of a smokestack. It's really noxious to be around that stuff. Then, economists do estimate the social cost of that pollution. And unanimously, economists agree, right wing, left wing, that an optimal policy is to impose what they call a Pagovian tax, on the good, to make it so that the cost of the good is the same as the social cost, so that therefore you don't get all the pollution, right? And so you're basically making the polluter internalize the cost to society of his pollution. And so this digression seems like it's just like academic, claptrap, but it's not, because. But the cool thing is that in like one of the first reports put out by Biden, they put out a higher new estimate of the social cost of carbon. I took that estimate. Now they're saying a ton of carbon. You're buying a gallon of gasoline, and we know how much carbon comes from burning a gallon of gasoline, or a gallon of oil to heat your house, or natural gas on your stove. And so what I did in this article at National Review, very easy to find. The title is "Mission Accomplished." Is I estimated what the price of oil would be if the Biden administration were able to get oil producers to internalize the social cost of carbon. Or to put it another way, what is the Biden administration's target oil price? They've actually, they printed it. They put out a report and said, okay, our target oil price is blah. And the answer is about $50 more than it was when they started, or like about $105, $110 a barrel.
That's about where we are.
That's where we are. And so they waged war on fossil fuels. And I said this to our friend Larry Kudlow on the air the other day, and there's like only one war Joe Biden's ever going to win, and he already won it, and it's the war on fossil fuels. And the reason why that leads to inflation is that fossil fuels are a key component for everything. Like, everything takes energy to make, and so on. And so if fossil fuel prices go up, then that's a shock that makes prices everywhere go up. And so there are multiple layers of the inflation story, but I think that the energy prices are probably the leading factor, and then of course their runaway spending.
Well, and I am not an economist, nor am I a biologist, but I do want to ask. Milton Friedman said that inflation is a monetary phenomenon, or it's always a monetary. I remember his exact quote, but long story short is it's a complete supply and demand. the more dollars you put into the system, chasing fewer goods, and inflation goes up. Is that at least part of what we're seeing here because of the $6 trillion that was spent in the first year of the Biden administration? That all of that cash sloshing around has driven up the prices for these goods. I mean, I understand that obviously the carbon regulation certainly is a piece of that, but can most of it be explained just by the oversupply by the Fed, especially, and the monetization of the debt and all those types of things that just
you nailed it. And I can say, by the way, that I'm right now at the Hoover Institution, and right where Milton Friedman was for a long time, and right near his office. My office is right near his office, and I was friends with Milton, knew him really well.
Like talking to Milton,
dinner with him.
I'm realizing a lifelong goal of talking to Milton.
Yeah, so anyway, so Milton and I would 100% agree what's going on right now. And not, of course, he's so smart that he thinks of things you didn't think of every time you talk to him. So I'm not asserting that I can channel Milton. But basically what happened was that the Biden administration really jacked up spending. And they did it at a time when they didn't need to anymore because the economy was recovering already. Like basically President Trump gave us two recoveries, one from COVID, one from Obama. And so the economy was fine when Biden took office. Now, it's true that President Trump did mail checks to people during the COVID crisis, right? But suppose that your income is $100 a month. And then I tell you can't go to work. And then if you don't go to work, you don't get paid. And so then suppose the government gives you $100 a month. Well, that's just enough to keep yourself going. And you don't have more money chasing fewer goods because basically you were going to have 100 before, you got 100 now, and we just filled the hole that we created because we told you can't go to work. But fast forward to Biden, and what he did is everybody's back at work, and then he still gave them the $100 a month, say, or it's actually $600 or whatever, and so you weren't filling a hole, which is what Trump was doing. You were piling on top. And so then all of a sudden, there's more money chasing fewer goods because we're refilling the hole, we're piling on top. And at that moment, when that happens, then the Fed has like multiple choices. But one thing that could happen would be that the Treasury has to borrow the money to mail the checks to people. And so they have an auction, and the Fed could refuse to participate. And they could sort of say, nope, we're not going to monetize this spending. We're going to make you find customers elsewhere who are willing to do this. If they had done that, then what would happen to interest rates? They'd go way up.
Way up, yeah.
Okay. So what happened was that the Fed decided to buy all that debt. In fact, and we were following it closely during the COVID period when I was meeting with Jay Powell all the time, and my office was, you remember, in the West Wing. Yeah. For some auctions, when we're borrowing money from around the world in order to mail checks to people, we had to buy like $150 worth of bonds at the Fed in order to sell $100 worth of bonds. Because basically what happened was that we were issuing so much debt that we were losing existing customers.
Yeah.
Right, and so the Fed bought an enormous amount of debt. And
you saw it on their balance sheet. Their balance sheet absolutely exploded.
Yeah, it went like that. So now what's happening? Okay, and this is where the monetary phenomenon is. So now what's happening is that the Fed is printing money, and it's giving it to the Democrats, and the Democrats are mailing it to people who are opening up their mailbox and finding these great checks from the government, and then they're going out and trying to buy things. And so this is almost exactly a helicopter drop of money. Yep. Right, you print money and you throw it out to people.
A Ben Bernanke type helicopter.
Yeah, it's absolutely a real helicopter drop. But there's like one subtle difference. But since we're kind of doing a mini economics class, that unless you're like Superman and you can fly, there's no expectation that when you get a helicopter drop of cash that you're going to give it back. But in this case, the taxpayers have been mailed checks, but future taxpayers are going to have to pay it back. Right, so it's not exactly a helicopter drop, and so if people were fully rational, then they would say, "Oh, well, they gave me $1, but tomorrow they're going to take it back, so I'm not going to spend it." And if people, so in a perfectly rational world, it could be that this wouldn't have a big inflationary effect. But as we see, it did. Yeah, as we see, it did.
So where the Fed expands their balance sheet to over 8 trillion, $9 trillion from I think about four. So they added, I mean, they're just like literally printing money, putting it into the system. Um, do they ever have to unwind that? Do they ever
Well, yeah.
have?
In fact, Lael Brainerd, who I had lunch with many times when as CEA chair, I went over to have lunch and talk policy with the Fed governors and the Fed chair. Came out and said that they have to sort of unwind that balance sheet, and the reason is inflation is so out of control.
Yeah.
The question is, are they going to be fast enough? And I think most everybody believes that they're not. I think that there's actually like some hubris that started with Ben Bernanke, who's a friend of mine, so I don't want to be too critical. But another friend of mine, Alan Greenspan, you might recall, you're old enough. The Greenspan, when he was Fed chair, he would talk about like the steering the economy is like steering the Queen Mary. I guess he's old enough that he knows what the Queen Mary is. I'm not sure everybody does that. It's a big boat,
Yeah.
right? A Queen Mary, and so if you want it to go somewhere, you got to start turning like way before. And if you don't do that, then you're going to not end up where you want to be. And so he was constantly anticipating future events and trying to get out in front of them. Ben Bernanke, on the other hand, messaged that we can sort of stop inflation in its tracks. We can turn things on a dime. He actually used phrases exactly like that. So he had the sort of confidence that the Federal Reserve was, driving a Formula One car, not the Queen Mary. And I think that confidence sort of stayed institutionally part of the Fed all the way through to today. And I think it's about to be proven wrong, but Ben's a brilliant guy, and it could be that I'm surprised and that inflation suddenly goes down to 2% over the next few months as the Fed acts. But I think it's extremely unlikely.
And you have, I mean, the other challenge to additionally to the monetary supply and all of the a lot of dollars chasing a few goods is you overlay the supply chain challenges. And so if you're a small business owner, you would love to sell as many widgets as you can, but you only have a limited supply of widgets, and so you have pricing power suddenly, which they haven't had in a long time, at least in my experience with small business owners. And so I mean, there's a lot of phenomenon that I just don't. I think the Queen Mary is a much better analogy than a Formula One race car, because I just don't think the Fed can twist these dials. I mean, you sat at the White House, trying to direct the economy, if you will, Kevin. And how did you feel as you're watching these, rear view mirror numbers come in, trying to figure out where it's going moving forward?
Yeah, it's pretty hard. And that's why we believe in free markets and free enterprise, and that the people who are best suited to make decisions are the people closest to the decision, the people on the ground.
Right.
And that's why we deregulated and cut taxes and sort of left the economy to the American people. Biden reversed all that, and we're paying the price. And the one thing you mentioned, though, that I want to actually clarify this because it's something that I think is a misconception that's out there. And it's the misconception that our troubles are being caused by supply chain disruptions. Okay. So a supply chain disruption, like in my mind, when I think what's a supply chain disruption, it's kind of like, there's a crash on the bridge, and you can't go across the bridge because there's a crash on the bridge, but they'll clear the wrecks, and then we can go across the bridge again. So there was a supply chain disruption, but supply chain disruption kind of implies like easy to fix, right? Which is why it implies temporary, which is why the Democrats love to use that phrase. It's not really inflation, it's just a supply chain disruption. But let me tell you that this is a historical pattern. I just turned 60 that I've seen over and over in my life, and let's just start by asking you a question, Matt. So suppose we pick a random socialist country, and then you go into a store. What do you see?
Empty shelves.
Empty shelves. Exactly. So now, suppose you start out with a healthy capitalist country, and then that healthy capitalist country, for whatever reason, elects far left people that celebrate socialism, and then pursue a whole bunch of policies and enact a whole bunch of policies that march the country towards socialism. So what's going to happen to the shelves in the stores? Well, at the beginning, the shelves were full because it was, Donald Trump's vibrant free economy. But as we march slowly towards socialism, all of a sudden the shelves start to empty. And the stuff that's left there on the shelves becomes really expensive because there's not much left. And people look ahead and say, well, pretty soon the shelves are really going to be empty, so I better buy it now. And so I think that another key factor to understand what's going on in inflation is that Biden declared war on America's business, threatened massive tax hikes, is already strangling them with new regulations. So they're, basically take it off. They say, that's it. I'm not going to do this anymore. Why should I, work 20 hours a day to keep my business going when they're going to tax me within an inch of my life? Or why should I build a new factory when they've threatened big tax increases and promised that they would pass them? And so I think that the way to think about what we're going through right now, and this is why the American people, even Democrats, have unanimously rejected what Biden and the far left, Nancy Pelosi, Democrats on the Hill have been doing to our country, is that they've been marching us rather rapidly towards socialism. And so, of course, the shelves are empty. Of course the shelves are empty because that's what happens in a socialist country. The shelves are empty. Yeah. And it's not a supply disruption, right? It's a supply destruction. And that's what they've been doing. And it's important that people recognize that.
Well, that's pretty bleak, Kevin.
Hey, I just saw Spielberg's West Side Story. I thought it was fantastic. Just try to some other thought, right? Sometimes change the subject completely.
That's hopeful, hopeful finish. Well, I have a law degree. I have an MBA. I've read the Wall Street Journal since I was a freshman in college, and so I am fascinated by the economy and how it works. I'm always led to a very simple conclusion that the less government's in the way of private transactions, the better. And it just seems to me, to your point, the more that the government tries to regulate, tries to put their thumb on the scale, tries to pick winners or losers, tries to tax, tries to incent people to do what they prefer versus what people actually want to do, that's where we end up with these huge messes. And I don't have a good answer. You've given me as smart an answer as anybody's ever given me on this Fed balance sheet expansion, but to me it looks very dangerous. And I know if you look at the numbers and they publish them, you can see at the beginning of Trump they were trying to bring that $4 trillion of assets down ever so subtly, and then when COVID hit, it just, like you said, it just was an exponential increase. And I just don't know, with monetary easing, with the American people expectations, I just can't see the Fed getting out of this mess, and that's going to just lead to more and more inflation because we're stuck in this kind of low rates situation where the whole thing, and maybe it does need to seize up. I think that's a lot of pain and discomfort for a lot of Americans, but unless they raise rates and try to sop up some of this excess cash in the system, I don't know any other way that this thing doesn't just spin out of control and we end up walking around with wheelbarrows full of cash.
Yeah, I don't know about hyperinflation, but I do know this, that we've got the highest inflation right now that we've had since the early 1980s, and that we're probably in a recession right now because incomes haven't kept up with prices. And so that means that real consumption is going down. Yeah. And so it could be next quarter or it could be the current quarter, but a recession is virtually a sure thing this year. And so we've got stagflation. And so, the worst president since Jimmy Carter has given us problems just like Jimmy Carter. I think that, Jimmy Carter, unlike Biden, people forget this. So you think, oh, geez, he really did take the country into a very bad corner. Jimmy Carter actually had a lot of good economic policies. People forget this. He was a moderate Democrat. He couldn't get elected anywhere in the country as a Democrat today. But one of Jimmy Carter's main economic policies, key part of his platform, was deregulation, and he meant it. Jimmy Carter was like I would say a brutal deregulator, and a lot of like legacy stuff, like the Interstate Commerce Commission, and things that were really strangling the economy. He relaxed. Despite that, with his sort of the rest of his Democratic agenda, he gave us stagflation, even though he was actually getting part of it right. Biden's worse than Jimmy Carter, because while he's doing the sort of ideological Democrat stuff that's going to cause stagflation, he's also doubling down on regulation. And so so he is an absolute, like, it's indisputable, he's way worse than Jimmy Carter. Yeah. And so if we end up with Jimmy Carter's economy, then I think we'll actually get off easy. I would be positively surprised and relieved if the only thing that happens is we get Jimmy Carter's economy. I think it could get way, way worse.
Oof. All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Kevin Hassett, how can people learn more about what you're doing? Obviously, you're at Hoover, but any other places where they can find?
Yeah, sure. Go to Amazon and buy my book, The Drift: Stopping America's Slide to Socialism. Second, I regularly write for National Review, the economics part of National Review called Capital Matters, and I encourage everybody to go to National Review online and look me up, and I write just about every other week, at least, sometimes every week there. And if you go to the Hoover Institution website, then I have a scholar page that links to everything I've been doing lately, if you'd like to check in on me.
All right. Well, Kevin Hassett, thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt.
Great. Liberty and Justice. We every Friday, 7 p.m. on CPAC Now, and then anywhere you get podcasts, or and my website, Whitaker.tv. So, Kevin, thanks for joining us.